All right, good morning, folks. Good to see you. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce Reverend Gyokei Yokoyama, our speaker for today. Gyokei-san is Kokusai Fukiyoshi, Soto Zen International Missionary, serving here in the U.S., abbot of Sozenji Buddhist temple in Montebello, California, near Los Angeles. A secretary of the Soto Zen Buddhism North American branch and on the board of SCBA-NA. Also, we serve together on the board of the Soto Zen Buddhist Association. And so it's wonderful to have Gyokei here in town. He's been meeting with many Soto Zen people. And so Gyokei-san is a dear friend of mine. And just on a personal note, the effort you make to travel all over North America, Canada, everywhere, relentlessly, I don't even know when you're going to go home or even if you really have a home at this point, just helping people to form our Soto Zen Dharma and make connections across cultures. It's really inspiring. So it's really sweet to have you here. Thank you so much, Gyokei.
Thank you. Ohayou gozaimasu. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me this morning. What a crowd. I felt both so warmly kind of want to get covered in this warm blanket of Dharma because people are sitting on both sides. I was a little bit tiny bit overwhelmed. Oh my gosh. So my name is Gyokei Yokoyama. Yokoyama is the last name. I'm Japanese, but I also became American in 2021. And I've been in the US for the last 10 years. So I'm here today with a specific role that I assume as our assistant guiding teacher, Ben, she introduced me as the secretary of what we call Soto Zen Buddhism North America office, which is a branch office in LA. And we have a similar office, one in Paris, one in Sao Paulo, Brazil, one in Honolulu. And there's something I'm missing here. I always do that. Yeah. And then where I think we had this discussion once, because there's one temple in Australia. So not quite happening yet. So we are we get together annually in Tokyo, share how Soto Zen is developing all over the world. And so that's where I come from. Also, I want to extend my special thanks to our guiding teacher, Ted, and a dear friend, assistant guiding teacher, Ben, for coming all the way to Japan this April. And Ted and I happened to sit on the same, next to each other in the Shinkansen Buret train. Oh, and thank you, yes, but all this. So it was just, I sense this energy and I really appreciate your willingness to connect despite all these cultural differences, language differences. I mostly work, even now, remotely as a translator of the Soto Zen office. My boss, that's the director, or some Japanese American people call him Bishop, Reverend Gengo Akiba. He's my supervisor and sometimes gives me a good lesson. Yes, he can be so kind sometimes. I hear and understand he and Katagiri Roshis were very close. And he often talks about how he was asked, he came to conduct his funeral service. And he often talks about Katagiri Roshi and its students. 2016, we had a SCBA conference, and Akiba Roshi came. At that time, I think, to share about this new Tempiozan monastery project. And he had a very kind of limited schedule. Yet one of the things he really wanted to do during the trip, which I was an attendant, was to come to this place. It was a very brief visit, but he was happy that he could extend his respect to Katagiri Roshi. I personally go out to remote places in Canada and try to share what I can share on behalf of the community that I sometimes representing. And I face many challenges, cultural gaps, my own lack of competency. So I've been thinking about this for quite some time, what it must be like for Katagiri Roshi to be in the Midwest, spreading this teaching in this, yes. So I'm finally here. For the last couple of few years, I've been traveling along the West Coast, East Coast, and this is the first time I'm visiting on behalf of the office in the Midwest. Apart from that, I've been traveling across Canada. Part of the reasons is I spent about a year up in Manitoba. That's where I picked up my English. I picked up lots of bad words too. 2 friends, I can casually swear still. So yes, there's a kind of special feeling that I have when I come to this part of this continent. And Ben showed me around. I arrived here on Thursday midnight and went to Clouds and Waters at Center in Sosan. Actually pulling in the parking lot and sleeping in the car before and jumping into the Zen practice. And then the next day I visited Genpo and Joanne-san of Compassionate Dharma Zen Center. And it's been fascinating to see all these communities. I'd like to share a little bit more about the office so this is one of the branch offices. We have about 60 registered Kokusai Kyoshi, international teachers. People don't like to use the word missionaries sometimes, but missionaries, yes. And along with my colleagues, co-workers are traveling across North America, and I have an easier job. I only have to travel in North America. I have a friend who has to go all around the world, transcontinental. And this kind of a outreach effort got sort of enhanced a little more. People became a little more energetic, enthusiastic about this as we had the centennial celebration of Soto Zen in North America in 2022 in form of big Gyokei, and then 2023 with celebration. And then just recently we had Keizan Zenji's commemoration service in Japan. So there's a kind of interesting momentum going on. And also it reflects some transitional stage we're seeing after Japanese American community brought this tradition as an ethnic culture. And then it became more prevalent, permeated through this country for the last at least 70 years more. Sometimes we address as convert Buddhist community. The goal of this centennial celebration was that we are here as Japanese missionaries to support the American leadership. And as personally as interpreter, we had a clear sort of a proclamation that, yes, this whole transition is happening, and we want to honor this traditions that's deeply planted, taken roots in the United States. As I travel around the States, I notice there are distinct, yet almost this whole authentic traditions and cultures. I think a big example is all these women ancestors, lineages. This whole accessibility, attentiveness to social issues, personal issues. I'm just fascinated constantly how Soto Zen continues to evolve and develop in this continent. And because of the unique relationship between US and Japan, not necessarily within the framework of Sotoshu, there's interesting interaction happening and some of the influence and ripples coming back to Japan. So I'm also translating some of the Dharma talks from American Zen teachers for my friends in Japan. As Ben said, I'm in a sort of a semi-homeless state. So I get to travel around. So multiple reasons behind this. So I'm kind of enjoying this current state. I'm not quite sure where I will eventually settle, but I'm traveling. But I'd like to also share a little bit about what I like to convey on behalf of Japanese Soto Zen a little bit. I was born and raised, grew up in a typical Buddhist temple community. I was the youngest, yet I was expected to assume the role of this priest, residential priest. And I don't know, I have to say this. So I'm here today, and when I show up, I always tell them, so I'm more like a foreshadow. I'm not really the main guy. That I'm a sign that one day there will be a main person coming one day. And so we have some Japanese priests come and visit. And when they do, they represent what they grew up with. I was explaining to Ben sometimes, as Japanese Soto Zen established this hereditary system, has a lot to do with the weakening, destruction of this monastics, this thing tied to this back then the shogunate government. We evolved multiple times as the government interference happened, society changed, national religion changed. So all these changes, we adapted to this new situation. The time I was born and raised, it was like your son, one of the sons would take over the temple, you stay. If you leave the temple, then that's dishonoring the community. When I left Japan, saying that I'd like to engage in international mission, after my teacher passed away, who was completely against the idea of international mission, I was seen as a bit of a traitor. So people have such a mixed feeling leaving, and when I was leaving Japan, the board members of the temple, who are the same age as my father, they're all classmates, he came tap my shoulder and said, "Hey son, I have to tell you something. You're committing yourself to this. Remember, you have no place to come back to." And that was just a way they could express with this fatherly love. Don't you ever think that you have a place to come back to. And that's been sustaining my practice very well. I had a couple of moments like, okay, all right, US, that's it, okay. That's not what it's like to live in the US. And still, I have fond memories. Let me just change the subject a little bit. The summertime, we just had a whole season called Obon. Obon comes from this word ulambana, which some say is a Buddhist term expressing like being hung upside down. Some of you might know it's a story of the mother of one of the Buddhist disciples. Also, some say it goes back, precedes the Buddhism itself, an ancient tradition in the Middle East of honoring the ancestors. In this tradition, we do it slightly differently across Japan. We offer food. It's a food offering ceremony. And we chant sutras, dharanis, mantras especially. When I was a child, I had a specific task to go out there to the riverbank and offer this chanting to the spirits, the fish, like all kind of creatures, and also the people who drowned in the river in the past. you can kind of imagine you line up at the bank of the lake offering this merit. The kind of food we offer is the kind of food we can make our effort to think of the grains. It's not the rice, the grains that people had centuries ago. Nuts, we don't have that, sorry, fruits, or so the type of food that we can think of as something that our ancestors had. We follow, there's a trace of ancient Chinese tradition, something that precedes like centuries ago. And I was trying to explain this to my friends in Japanese American community, whose sansei, third generation, often complains to me, I don't understand any of this. It doesn't make any sense to me. And then this time I was trying to explain this. Well, let's just stretch our imagination. 500 years from now, maybe 1,000 years from now, they might not be speaking the same language. They might not be eating the same type of food, but they're doing their best to think of what we are doing today. They might be offering coffee. And then they might be saying some English words or something that might sound like today's English language. In a sense, that's what we're doing out here, chanting the sutras that doesn't really fully sink in immediately, yet honoring what was back then happening, ancestors, that precedes today's American culture and social norm. The things we're bringing with us. And I think it's very big, especially as this whole thing was conveyed to North American continent. I always try to keep in mind how big this is of a deal. You may think of it in a larger historical context. Zen practice, you might sometimes wonder, sitting like here, okay, I'm calm down. Okay, now what am I doing here? One time I had to develop this terrible hobby of falling asleep within 30 seconds, maintain this perfect posture, and nobody notices. Yeah, that's a little bit of a side effect of this intense practice I had in AHG. And I felt so bad about it. Can I just stop this? I don't know what to do with this. And I have this story of a Zen monk, senior monk in the Zendo, at the rank of the Zazen. He stretches his arms like, oh, that was a good nap. So I'm like, wow. Today, I think as I work with Ben for SCBA, we are very attentive to how we can make this practice available, accessible to as many people as there are out there with all the conditions of life. We get hungry, we get lonely, we crave for relationship, we need stability. We struggle with the relationship with families, sometimes friends. The relative nature of life that we have, that's something I always make, that I think of as what we do as the practice of bodhisattvas. I'm here assuming a role, this particular role of Secretary of Soto Zen Office. Outside of this, I have this important role of being a daddy of an 11-year-old child, son with Down syndrome. Spent the whole summer taking care of him. So the September study, I felt so rusty. And this whole mission started like, okay, am I really ready for this? And then the part of me is this relative part of me says, I wouldn't mind this goes away and I assume just role of what my son called a stinky daddy. And yet, when we do Zazen, this is the gateway or an embodiment of this timeless nature of our teaching, which doesn't come always with language. Timeless nature. And I think that's what fascinates us all. Shakyamuni Buddha was there for 2,500 years ago. Dogen was here centuries ago. All the ancestors. And they lived in a different cultural setting, different norm. And yet there's this thing that transcends, this thread that runs right through to our heart. As you might, many of you, I've been developing this huge respect to the people who have rich life experience. Like there's separation, there's all things that makes us anxious. But then this is what we go through as we lives, we go on as a life. And then yet there are moments, should I just go with this, what socially acceptable here? And then there's this Buddha Dharma here. Like, okay, what should we do with this? What I did was I went with the social Dharma and reflected on the Buddha Dharma. So, yes, I want to sort of, I find myself getting lost in thought. Yes, as I said, I do translation work for Sotoshu. And yet, ironically, what's most appealing about Zen practice is that fact that this practice transcends language and culture. Non-linguistic nature, non-cognitive, non-digestible part of that frustrated me so much as a young. I just like to share just briefly with the remaining time, because I want to have some questions answered time. In Japan, as you grow up, you'd be surrounded by these statues of bodhisattvas and buddhas. It used to scare me. A couple of them look very scared, fierce looking. And we say it's a manifestation. Manjushri Bodhisattva we enshrine in the Zen hall. Manifestation of wisdom. Avalokiteshvara, Kuan Yin, the compassion. Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, actions. It should be my favorite. I always said, well, no, not that knowledgeable. I'm not sure if I'm that kind. Well, I can take actions. It's very superficial understanding. Well, that was a kid's understanding. But my favorite was so this is a very tiny cartoon character that we have in Japan, designed for small children, 2, 3, 4. It's called Anpanman, and I introduced him to other sanghas. And Anpanman is created by this person, Mr. Yanase. It reflects that was born after World War II. And there's a song that reflects something really deep about the people, soldiers who are sent out there. This is children's cartoon show. In this cartoon show, the anpan means like bread filled with bean paste, sweet bean paste. I don't know what would be equivalent in the US.
Filled donut?
Filled donut, yeah, so you can think of donuts. Yeah, so his head is a donut. Almost like a Boston cream. Yeah. And he travels around, he finds whoever's in trouble, and almost always in each episode, he managed to find a person, not necessarily a person, sometimes it's a rabbit, sometimes a dog, manages to find someone who's hungry. So he flies just down there casually, and he takes out a portion of his head, really casually. There you go. And then let the person eat a portion of his head. And there's this character, villain. And in this episode, almost always he gets defeated. That's because he's losing the portion of his head. But then, it's a great thing is that he's a brat, so there's always some replacement. So there's a friend who comes out and help him, and his head gets renewed. The person who created this character in the cartoon show says, this is never a story of a self-sacrifice. It's happened so casually. And giving a portion of your head, which is a resource, your energy. He never thinks about if his energy gets drained, he gets tired, he loses a portion of what he has as a power, just gives it out there. And he gets so freely defeated. But then, of course, we all know because the children's show that he eventually wins. And then this is something that I also sometimes reflect as a practice, that the way we practice, we make ourselves available for the practice. We engage in social actions. We engage in this other people's lives. Many ministers, we call these ministers, serve Buddhist communities, Japanese Americans. We sometimes feel tired, get lonely, misunderstood, undervalued. We're humans, so this kind of feeling creeps in. And it's so important for me personally to think of this particular character. We give out, but I don't think this Anpanman has any notion that he's giving out anything. And when he gets defeated, I don't think he has any notion that it's happening because he gave out the portion of his head. The total freedom to get tired, total freedom to feel, total freedom to get tired, to get sleepy, to get hungry, total freedom to get energized, supported, to feel comforted or to be comforted, total freedom to age, to die. There's just no distinction there. And when there's not that, even the slightest distinction, feel always that's your practice. That's where this bodhisattva practice happens. And when you have this a tiny bit of the gap, and again, it just transforms the practice into, again, the practice of duality, where the gap emerges. Soto sure brings things that might feel foreign to you because we live in a very different culture sometimes. Intercultural communication, as we're trying to achieve, a beautiful thing, and yet it creates this gap. No. There are many moments like that. And because of that, probably, this mindset, this way of practicing the bodhisattva way, becomes so important to me. I'd like to conclude just by extending my appreciation for wholeheartedly engaging yourself in this practice. It's been a huge inspiration to me coming from Japan. I consider myself as a little teeny wire, not much in there, but I know that there's this great things happening around. And my motive always is just, I want these people to know about this great roshis in Japan there. And I want my friends who are continuing this practice, sometimes feeling like, not sure what they're doing, or feeling discouraged, to know that this amazing thing is happening in the Western Zen culture. Language barrier has been the greatest source of frustration to me. But at least, see, I'm not an excellent translator, interpreter. I did this in Tokyo in professional field. And I have understanding, okay, I'm okay, they're professional folks. But I've been quite really fortunate to be able to do this in this specific context of Soto Zen. And I'd love to continue to be a tool. In any way I can be instrumental. And this is something that makes my life feel representative from Tokyo sometimes comes, I admire your selfless effort. You sacrificed so much in your life because you could have been in this big temple, have some stability. I said, not really, that's how I feel. I feel like I'm doing the most selfish thing in a way that I can think of. And that's kind of how I feel. And I feel so fortunate to have met you. And thank you. I hope we can continue to cultivate this relationship. And we'll bring some Roshis one day here. So, is it too soon? It's all good. Yes. So I'd like to invite you for any questions, both on Zoom in person, about the. I think I know this. Yes. Go ahead.
Have you been to Indiana to see Okimura Roshi? He was here for 3 years.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to visit Okumura Roshi's temple. Yes, he. Sanshinji is one of the places on my bucket list. I haven't, so this time I was hoping that I could include Sanshinji as a part of this tour that I'm making. Unfortunately, it's not happening, but I had a chance to meet and talk to Okumura Roshi. As you all know, he's such a lovely person, lovely teacher. When I work for the office, I have access to the archive information, and I can see the trace of the days when Shohaku-san Okumura Roshi was serving in office. I think he was proposing something like, I could be wrong, but this workshop opportunities to share, make it more available. He was really, and I had a chance to sit next to him on one of the lunch hours in the 100th anniversary. And I was surprised how down to earth he was and profound, teaching. I'm sorry, it's kind of drew myself. I have not yet. Have you?
Yes, and yeah, he knew Katagiri, and he had discussed with Katagiri that that he might be able to help here sometime.
Okay.
It's very interesting that he made a vow, though, that he would come here for 3 years only, because he wanted one of Katagiri's disciples to be teaching at this. And he was very clear over the 3 years he was around that he would be looking to go elsewhere. He did not want to compete here in Minneapolis. He and his wife really enjoyed living here. But he didn't want to be here as a competition for one of Katagiri's disciples.
Okay. Yes, I've heard a little bit about this. Yes, competition. Yes. I always take that as caring. Yes, people care. So, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Wow. I know Okumura Roshi stepped down from Sanshinji's abbot's role, but I'm in touch with the successor Hoko. And that's another community fully committed to establishing, nurturing this connection in Japan. So, wow. I deeply respect Shohaku Roshi. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, this is more philosophical, so I'm probably going to be incoherent, but the north face and the south face and the east face of the west face of the mountain, and then they have a single tip, single point, which no one can stand on because it's infinitesimal. But the universal reality that we all try to approach in our different languages, and the very salutary fear on the part of the academic left that if I force somebody to say nirvana, they won't get to see nibbana. And you said that that there is this universal psychic reality, and yet psychic reality is tends to particularize. So you have your donut head and he's Japanese, and can we translate him? So I'm helpless on the north face of the mountain.
Oh, that's great. Wow. I was gonna share a little bit about this north and south thing. In my particular community, not all temples in Japan do it. You're facing the Buddha. You consider this as a north traditionally. Well, even though it might not necessarily be facing the north. Yeah, because some might be coming from this side. Yeah, anyway, the north side, the Mount Meru, the Shakyamuni Buddha ancestors, and beyond Shakyamuni Buddha. And then in some services, like we actually rotate the whole thing, and then we have another altar in the south side. And in my community, we had an altar outside. Sentient beings, hungry ghosts. Yes, often consider myself one of the hungry ghosts these days, really. But hungry ghosts, the south. We face south. All this caring, attentiveness, sentient beings, social actions, serving the vulnerable. Southward, we're facing the south. And I think when people, I guess, been to Vietnam and all different countries at once, I think one thing that we constantly, I like being that way. I served in the politics just a little bit. It's totally inspired by Bonnie Glassman, socially engaged Buddhism. And I did that, just totally facing the south. And then you do it, maybe I say like, just do it. Then you start to realize the significance of this side more and more. Because right. So in the traditional rituals, we face the north first. Make sure, and we bow down. We face the south, we reach out and serve. And then if you think about it, it's a ritual. Yet there's that deep meaning behind these rituals. And I feel like this is an important notion or understanding, part of understanding we might want to maintain, keep, especially in the US, as we're socially so actively engaged. I'm not sure if this is linked to what you're saying, but yeah, because verbalizing the understanding sometimes gets us lost. Facing the nose also confuses us. It confuses me still, because it's not the realm that our thing in our head doesn't always encapsulate and grasp and say, okay, this is an answer. It never comes out this way. So anyway, yeah. Okay. So just checking both screen. Okay, yes.
So thank you for the story of the figure who gives pieces of it's a wonderful figure. And it reminded me of a scripture in Hebrew scriptures in the book of Proverbs that says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, and it shall return to you after many days." And that scripture has always meant a lot to me. Just to have a heart of giving out, and eventually that will come back to you. And that was perfectly. That it seems like it goes hand with the
Thank you. I quite honestly feel quite ignorant. I share this with my colleagues too. Some of us go to the university and study the text, but frankly, including Dogenzo and Shobogenzo, we consider that almost like impenetrable. We tackle, keep going. And maybe one day, maybe you're on age 70 or something, like, oh, okay, this makes sense. That's typically how we approach scriptures and sutras. I think there's this firm belief that it doesn't come from the word, it has to accompany this. But I appreciate the availability of this immense volume of scriptures and texts in modern English language. No, thank you. Oh, sorry. You know what? I think just before that, yes.
I'm curious about how you broke yourself of the habit of falling asleep during zazen, assuming.
Well, that was the time I came back from the monastery. There's a little bit of background story of totally kind of leaving this thing behind because I grew up with it. It's so much, maybe too much part of my life. So I need to reset my mind to make a re-entry. And I won't go to details. This re-entry happened through the Jesuit community who reintroduced me to Zen practice. But anyway, I went to Eiheiji. I was 20 and came back with that sleeping habit. And also this immense dissatisfaction. Just I came out totally this undigestible nature of the practice and saying, what the heck was that? But then deep down there, you know that there's something I'm just not understanding, missing. And that was at that time I kept falling asleep. I left the practice for a while back then. Well, not exactly. I did it my own sometime. How did I get rid of that sort of pattern? It stayed for a long time. It stayed. I had time where I incorporated more mindfulness practice, things like what you might do sometimes, body scan. It did help, of course. Sotoshu doesn't discourage people from doing that. It's just we tell people not to be totally obsessed with it or caught up with this. So I used multiple methods just to feel like, okay, I get more concentrated. Well, and then when I bring these questions to senior monks, they say, oh, that's good. That's good. And that's it. So, okay, I'll do whatever works for me. And not that they didn't care anything, but it's at the same time, it wasn't really something they were too concerned about. Yeah. Yeah, that's where I heard the story of this monk waking up from the zazen, like, oh, God, that was good. That was liberating. I know.
Well, I had a question about your father's temple.
Yes.
Did they have difficulty finding a replacement priest? And have you been back there?
Well, many temples are facing the shortage of successors. In Japan, we have this, because it's for a while, I think it will stay linked to this hereditary system. But nowadays, children don't always succeed the temple. Just like, children who are born to the farmers or, maybe stores, they don't necessarily take over parents' business. I think it's happening all over. And the parents also don't want their children to be stuck in the temple. It's our generation. So shortage of successors happening. And then if there's no successor, if it's a small temple, they get consolidated. And that's what happened to Montebello Sozenji Temple. Our plan was to have the temple affiliated with parent temple, with Zenshoji Temple. But they wanted someone who can work exclusively for the Sangha, understandably. Sometimes in Japan, we have a Dharma relatives. Sometimes, and I think we consider that it's quite important that we carry on the legacy and the shared understanding of the teaching, maybe in this case, Katagiri Roshi's spirit. And then within that, we try and figure out. In early days in Japan, when I look at the history of Japanese temples in 1500s, like if I took over the temple, I would have made a 32nd or 33rd abbot, a priest. And I think it's a large number. But then if you think of this first 50 years when it started, we noticed there's a lot of the people are in this sort of short term, serving the community for a short period of time. There's a lot of shuffling, rotating happening. That's the formative time, I think, of Soto Zen in Japan, age community temples. And in today's North American Soto Zen, what I'm seeing is like interim, like abbots in apprentice or something. So you make some exchange. Also, what I think we're seeing is reach out to organizations like us and see, is there anybody available? And also a large number of temples are trying to come up with their own leadership, co-leadership, multiple and co-stewardship. I think that's is what I observe through all the report, the information that's coming through the office. Yeah, and I think there's something valuable in exchanging this. How are you dealing with this in the East Coast? How are you dealing with this situation in the West Coast? So that's where I'm kind of seeing while I visit many communities. But yes, Dharma lineage. In my temple, my father brought in somebody who's from outside of the lineage. That was big, So that made my departure extra difficult. Again, that's something we share as a Satoshi culture in Japan. I'm very curious what innovative way people would sort of come up with in the US. Sorry, I'm not giving you an answer.
In your experience, how do lay people practice in Japan?
And when I was in Aiheiji, we had occasional kind of programs where I invite lay Zen practitioners. And these people that I saw in Aiheiji are probably the closest to the lay practitioners that we've seen today in the US. Mostly in Japan, in the parish, Danka community. It's very close to maybe what you might see in Thai, Cambodia, Thai. There's a clear distinction between lay and priest. It's the same in Japanese American community. They could literally, there's a gap, there's a stage, only the priest is supposed to go, and this place where lay people come and attend. Oh, okay. So when I had students who came to Japanese American community with bare feet, because Japanese, I'm wearing this tabi. This was such a big deal. I had asked my friends to wear socks on the stage. We see them as we tend to see practitioners who engage in a practice along with priest. Of course, it's a sign of dedication, but not everyone's interested or engaged in zazen. There are different kind of ways. We have a thing called Gyokei. It's like a Buddhist hymn. That's something a lot of people sign up for. This might be a teacher, a good teacher to invite at one point. There are what we call ko. I think it's like a bit roughly translated as a circle. We have the temple in the rural community that I grew up. Not, all priests are limited, so it's not like they're available to every small communities. Where our town was divided into valleys. So each valley has distinct village culture, and they fight sometimes. They don't get along. But then each has this circle, and then there's a lay leader, and they develop their own unique way. So lay culture in the US isn't anything really particularly new or unique. I think we saw this in Japan. I'm sure this happened in different countries as well. Yeah, priests are seen as somebody who's been sent to the monastery See, it's not so much of if it's this priest is an excellent person of great virtue. Sometimes like a priest, like, yeah, like he can chant, sure, that's great. But yeah, they honor this. I think it's Asian, particularly Asian culture that. And then we get invited to this lay practice community and offer the service and ceremony. We come out. Yeah, there's this sort of a thing. We do have a lay teacher accreditation thing, mostly for the wives of the priest. There's a premise that's all hereditary system. So, and it's also a way to recognize the long years of dedication of lay practitioners. So we consider them. So my stepmother, my parents, my stepmother who was staying at the temple that I left, she has this lay teacher thing. She has a certain, I don't want to use the power, but she has a way to appoint a priest and take care of the Sangha. But there's still this kind of a line about what to do, especially regarding ritual side. But she basically is the one who's taking care of the community. So yeah, Japan has a sort of a slightly different sort of approach to lay practitioners and lay leaders. Yeah, but yeah, there is something. Haven't really fully explored that in the context of intercultural exchange. Might be something interesting to share. Okay.
I have a question. So, I'm also a professional translator, so I can relate to the stories that you and interpret two different things. Based on your practice and who you are today and on your work as a translator, what are the kind of big memories that you have of the big gap between cultures and trying to make this translation kind of be congruent and meaningful to the target, like for instance, from Japanese into English in the culture?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the challenges I personally face, I mean, there are already great translators like Kazu Tanahashi, Issho Fujita is another person that I truly respect. But personally, what I do encounter as an obstacle is because Buddhist terms are so well established as a language from China. How do we put this in a more casual, modern day Japanese language without allowing it sound cheap, allowing it sound too spiritual? And that is, I find, is most tricky and most rewarding and challenging part of the translation. Japanese people have developed some sort of anti kind of religious sentiment, and religion sometimes becomes quite deeply tied to cult. Any sort of form of set belief. It's not that I'm saying that they're not non-religious and non-spiritual. They are, but the way it happens, it becomes so tied to culture. And I have this conversation often with my friends. When we present this, instead of using the word religion, it makes so much more sense for Japanese people. We say, well, this is part of educational programs. This is a cultural program. And maybe that's where I use the word intercultural. And within that, all these teachings and dharma, it's already embedded. Other thing that I kind of trying these days, trying to keep telling myself, nothing is untranslated, because we have always some sort of way of expressing it. Maybe these days I'm a little more consciously using hiragana, a Japanese word. I'm sure that's probably what Dogen did, right? He used all the Chinese words, but he also used the hiragana, more accessible language. And we consider that as more of a Japanese language compared to kanji, Chinese letters, as an imported language. It's so deeply tied to Buddhist practice because that's how it came. And then, yes, what's the language? Not just in a literal sense. How do we translate it to the language? That's thinking. Is that also?
Absolutely. Yeah.
What's your language?
English and Spanish.
Oh, wow. I have a friend in San Francisco, Zen Center, who's really active in spreading it. Right. So- Thank you so much for sharing the practice. Should we conclude?
Thank you so much, Gyokei-san. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll have some announcements now.